The wind howled across the prairie like a grieving spirit the night Eleanor Whitmore found herself standing at the rough-hewn door of Caleb Turner's candlelit cabin, her black widow's shawl clutched tight around trembling shoulders, her heart pounding not from the cold but from the ache she had carried alone for far too long. Months had passed since they'd lowered her husband into the frozen Wyoming earth. Months of silence so thick it pressed against her lungs. Months of neighbors, pitying glances and empty bed sheets that felt colder than the grave itself. And yet nothing had prepared her for the quiet strength in Caleb's eyes when he opened the door and saw her standing there, vulnerable and breaking beneath a sky that offered no mercy. He had always been the quiet cowboy on the edge of town, the one men respected and women whispered about, broad-shouldered and steady as the mountains. But beneath the rugged exterior lived a patience forged by loneliness. And when he stepped aside without a word to let her in, the golden glow of candlelight flickered across timber walls and danced along the stone hearth, wrapping around Eleanor like the first kindness she had felt in years. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine wood and leather and something warm baking in the oven, a sharp contrast to the emptiness she had grown used to. And for a moment she simply stood there, unsure whether to speak or collapse under the weight of her unspoken grief, until Caleb gently took her shawl and draped it over a chair, his calloused fingers brushing hers, just long enough to remind her she was still alive. The silence between them was not awkward, but heavy with everything neither dared to say, and when she finally whispered that she didn't know how to keep going, her voice cracked like brittle ice on a thawing river. Caleb didn't offer hollow comfort or rehearsed sympathy. He simply guided her to sit by the fire, kneeling before her so their eyes met as equals, his voice low and steady as he told her that surviving wasn't weakness and that needing someone didn't make her faithless to the past. Tears streamed down her cheeks then, not the polite tears she had shed at the funeral, but deep, shaking sobs pulled from a place she had tried to bury. And when she leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest, she felt his arms circle her, not possessive, not demanding, just present. And in that embrace, something inside her began to thaw. "Don't stop! I need this," she cried, not out of desire alone, but from a desperate hunger for warmth, for reassurance, for the grounding strength of another heartbeat close to hers. And Caleb held her tighter, rocking her gently as the storm battered the cabin walls, as if daring the world to try and steal this fragile moment of peace. Hours seemed to pass in that quiet exchange of breath and heartbeat, the candles flickering low as shadows softened the hard lines of grief etched across her face. And when she finally looked up at him, there was no shame in her eyes, only the dawning realization that love does not dishonor memory, it honors survival. Caleb brushed a tear from her cheek with surprising tenderness, telling her she didn't have to face another winter alone. That strength sometimes meant letting someone share the burden, and the firelight reflected in her gaze as if hope itself had sparked anew. Outside, the prairie winds slowly calmed, surrendering to the steady glow from the cabin windows. And inside, Eleanor felt something she had thought forever lost, a future not defined by mourning but by choice. She spoke of her fears then, of gossiping townsfolk and the guilt that shadowed every smile, and Caleb listened without interruption, promising nothing grand except honesty and patience, promising to walk beside her at whatever pace she could bear. And in that promise, she found more comfort than in any dramatic declaration. When he rose to add another log to the fire, she followed, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, not as a replacement for what she had lost, but as proof that her story was not finished. And as the candles burned low and the night deepened, Eleanor understood that healing was not betrayal, it was bravery. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and silvered with frost. And when she stepped onto the porch, wrapped in Caleb's spare coat, she drew in a steady breath that no longer trembled, turning back toward the man who had given her shelter not just from the cold but from despair itself. In that quiet sunrise, she chose not to run from whispers or from her own heart. And Caleb, standing beside her, did not claim her as something fragile to protect, but as a partner strong enough to stand again. Their story would not be easy. Frontier life rarely was, but it would be honest, built on shared loss and shared resilience. And as Eleanor squeezed his hand, she realized that sometimes the bravest words are not declarations of passion, but simple pleas for connection answered with unwavering presence. If this chapter of courage, healing and frontier romance moved you, if you believe that even in the darkest winters, the human heart can find its way back to warmth, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more powerful stories of love, redemption, and strength rising from sorrow. Because the next story might just remind you that hope is always waiting at the edge of the storm.